As the first product in this entire research project, you will be creating an annotated works cited. Now, we've done one of these before, but it's worth reviewing what an annotated works cited does, because an annotated works cited is different than a research paper, it's different than a constructed response, it's different than a 5-paragraph essay. It is different because it doesn't ask you to prove a point. What it asks you to do instead is to just think about your sources, to think about how your sources will be used, how you think your sources relate to what you're trying to answer, and how your sources relate to each other. So it asks you to think critically about your sources before you actually begin writing your paper. You're evaluating them in terms of the information they provide, how useful that information is, and how credible that information is. You provide a paragraph, an annotation, for each of the sources, and that paragraph will include that information. So let's take a look at the rubric for this annotated works cited. By this point, you will have selected your research question, you have begun finding your sources, you may have even created an annotation, you may have even created a works cited entry for one of your sources. So now you're really working on evaluating them. The annotated works cited has an introduction. Again, though, it's a little different because it doesn't have a thesis statement. A thesis statement is what you want to prove in your paper, and you're not ready for that step yet. You're not sure what it is you're going to prove because you're still in the information gathering stage. So the introduction provides an attention getter, like it usually does, a connection to your piece of literature that you're working with, and then it has your research question or questions. So your overall research question here will be useful, but then some of those sub-questions that you wrote will also be useful here. And you want to make sure that you explain why you want to know those answers. How does knowing those answers help you understand your piece of literature better? Then you'll have the works cited entry. That's what most of you have been using Noodle tools for. Then you have the annotation paragraph. And in that annotation paragraph, you explain why the source is credible and reliable, give a brief summary of the information that the source provides. And I do really mean a brief summary, maybe a sentence, maybe two, explaining how it relates to your research question. And then you also want to compare it to the other sources. How does this source connect to the other information you've found? And then you repeat that process for each of the sources. If you look below, you can see you need a total of 4. Here's how you'll be graded. Now, these elements of the annotation paragraph should sound familiar if you have been using the note sheet that I provided for you. You can see you've got this piece that asks you to verify the credibility. You've got this piece that asks you to compare it to the other sources. Quick paraphrase of the info, connection to your research question. So all of the elements that you need in the works cited are here in the top portion of this note sheet. It's just a matter of turning them into the annotation paragraph. So let's take a look at an example. This is an example annotated works cited that I did for a book that I read on my own, not one that we covered in class. The novel is called The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. And one of the pieces of this novel that didn't make sense to me was this idea about guardianship. The main character is an adult, fully functioning adult, but yet she has what's called a guardian who makes all of the decisions for. Not to go into too much detail, but a lot of terrible things happen to her at the hands of her guardian, and she reacts very violently to him. And I wondered about that. How can an adult be placed under guardianship? And so that's what I wanted to research, is that system of guardianship in Sweden. And you can see that my introduction reflects that. So I have my first sentence is an attention getter. I give a very quick summary of what happens in the novel, and then that leads into my research questions. And in this case, I've used all 3 of my research questions, the sub-questions. And then, as a last sentence, I've explained why I want to know the answers to those questions. Okay, so I'm going to scroll down. Here is my first citation. This is one of my sources, so that comes next. And now my annotation paragraph. And I've color-coded mine here. You don't need to do that. The red is a summary of what that information is, what that source had to tell me. The blue explains why I know I can trust that information. The purple compares it to the other sources. And then the green explains how it relates to my thesis. And there you can see it in all its color coding. So there's 4 parts to those annotation paragraphs. A general overview of what the information is about, how it connects to your thesis, that's the green, why it's credible and reliable, that's the blue, and then the comparison to the other sources, that's the purple. And that's what you do for each of these sources. So remember, you're not trying to prove a point here, you're just explaining how you evaluated your sources. Essentially, why you chose to use the 4 sources that you chose. Let me know if you have any questions. Let me know if I can help you. And if you watch this video all the way through, send me a message with the word peanut butter cup, and you'll get a bonus point.